Sicily, the land where time moves like smoke, and every sunset tastes of wine, ash, and secrets. The heart of the old city of Palermo, the name Cassian Dravaro carried both reverence and fear. The Dravaro family built empires not from trade or steel, but from silence and blood. Cassian was the last of them, the heir to a kingdom carved by his father's cruelty, and the world called his father one name only: Il Diavolo, the devil. Cassian had left Italy 10 years ago, swearing never to return. He'd buried his past in the cobblestone alleys and sworn that his father's sins would never stain him. But destiny, that cruel Sicilian mistress, never lets her sons go. When he returned, it was for a funeral. The devil was dead, or so they said. The Dravaro mansion stood like a mausoleum at the edge of the sea, black marble, rusted gates, and windows that never opened. Inside, the scent of cigar smoke and old whiskey lingered like ghosts. Every servant lowered their head when he walked past, whispering. As if the devil still listened, Cassian's face was calm, but his eyes were storms, a perfect echo of the man they'd once feared. He walked to the study, the room his father ruled from, a dark cathedral of power, and there, in the dim light, sat a lawyer from Naples, holding a letter sealed in black wax. "Your father left this for you," the man said quietly. "He said you'd understand." The seal was the Dravaro crest, a serpent coiled around a crown. Cassian broke it open. Inside were only 10 words, 10 words that dragged him back into hell. "Find her before they do. She carries your salvation." Il Diavolo, Cassian frowned. "Who?" But the lawyer only shrugged. "No name. No clue. Just those words." That night, Cassian walked the marble halls, hearing echoes of his childhood, his mother's distant cries, his father's gunfire, the prayers that never reached heaven. He poured a glass of whiskey and stared at his reflection in the window. The sea was restless. So was his soul. And then he saw her, across the courtyard, a woman in a black dress standing beneath the olive tree, her hair catching the silver of the moon. He froze. She wasn't one of the servants. She didn't belong there, and yet she looked at him as if she knew him. He stepped outside, his footsteps silent on the marble. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice low, dark. The woman turned. Her eyes were green, fierce, wounded, and familiar in a way that made his chest tighten. "My name is Seraphina Vale," she said softly, "and I know what your father meant." The wind howled through the olive branches. The waves crashed against the rocks below, and in that single moment, Cassian felt the world shift, as if fate had opened its mouth and whispered his doom. The next morning, Palermo woke under a bruised sky. The Dravaro mansion glowed faintly in the dawn, a fortress of wealth and ruin. Cassian sat at the long dining table, untouched breakfast before him. The storm from last night hadn't left his mind. Neither had the woman, Seraphina Vale. She appeared again, quiet as a shadow, wearing a simple white blouse, her hair tied back, and fear. No hesitation, only calm. "You shouldn't be here," Cassian said, not looking up. "The gates are locked." She smiled faintly. "The devil gave me a key before he died." Cassian's fork stilled midair. His gaze lifted, slow and sharp. "Impossible." But she reached into her pocket and placed it on the table, an old iron key engraved with the Dravaro serpent. "He told me," she whispered, "that one day his son would return. And when he did, I was to tell him the truth." Cassian leaned back, every muscle tense. "And what truth is that?" Seraphina's green eyes shimmered. "That everything you believe about your father's empire is a lie." The words struck like gunfire. She told him stories of secret alliances between the Dravaros and political figures, of a hidden child taken from the streets of Naples, and of a war brewing within the underworld of Italy's coast. Cassian listened, jaw tight. He had walked away from that world to become a ghost, but ghosts had a way of dragging you back into the living. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked. Seraphina met his gaze, voice trembling. "Because I owe your father my life. And because you are the only one who can stop what's coming." That night, Cassian found himself in his father's study again. He opened the drawers, searching through letters, contracts, ledgers. Everything smelled like death and tobacco. until he found a photograph, a faded picture of a little girl with dark curls and green eyes, Seraphina on the back, his father's handwriting. The debt I could never repay. The glass in his hand shattered. He realized now, she wasn't some stranger. She was the key his father had spoken of, the child of his father's greatest sin and his greatest redemption. Days bled into nights. Seraphina remained in the mansion, guiding, arguing, uncovering. Cassian tried to hate her, but hate was easy. She was not. Her presence softened the marble edges of his loneliness. They would walk through the courtyard, her voice low as she told him of her past, orphans,
fire,
betrayal, the devil's mercy that had saved her life but branded her forever. You don't understand what he did for me, she whispered one evening as the sky burned crimson. He took me in, trained me,
protected me,
but he also made me his spy. I spent half my life lying for him. Cassian's voice was a growl. Then why protect his legacy? She turned, eyes wet. Because even devils can love, Cassian. Her words lingered like smoke. But outside the Dravaro gates, the city shifted. Old enemies stirred. Rumors spread that Il Diavolo's heir had returned, and with him came death. Cassian's old associates, rivals, and the Vatican's shadow unit known as La Croce Nera, the Black Cross, began hunting for something his father had hidden before his death, something they called the Ledger of Souls, a record of every crime, every secret, every betrayal that tied the Italian elite to the Dravaro Empire. Whoever found it could destroy governments or rebuild them, and somehow Seraphina was at the center of it. One night, while thunder rolled over the coast, Cassian found her in the chapel beneath the mansion, lighting a candle before an ancient crucifix. Her shoulders shook as she whispered a prayer. If you truly believe in redemption, he said quietly behind her, why hide the truth? She turned, tears glistening. Because that truth would destroy you. He stepped closer, then let it. Their eyes met, fire and sorrow, both knowing how wrong it was to feel this, yet unable to stop. He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his hand trembling. Tell me, Seraphina, he whispered. What am I to you? Her lips parted. The son of the man who saved me, and the man who could damn me. Outside, lightning struck the sea. Inside, silence fell. Heavy, sacred, and full of something neither of them dared to name. The first bullet shattered the chapel window. Cassian pulled Seraphina to the ground as glass exploded around them. Outside, headlights flashed across the cliffs, black cars crawling toward the mansion like hungry beasts. The war had come to his door. He rose to his feet, gun drawn, eyes cold as marble. Seraphina clutched his arm. They found us, she breathed. Stay behind me, he ordered. He moved like a man reborn from violence, the heir he swore he'd never become. For hours, gunfire echoed through the Dravaro estate. Cassian fought with precision, every move a deadly dance his father had taught him. Bodies fell, shadows fled, but the darkness stayed. When silence finally returned, smoke and blood painted the marble floors. Cassian's breathing was steady, but his soul trembled. Seraphina knelt beside a fallen man, tears in her eyes. Who are they? Cassian demanded. La Croce Nera, she whispered. They want the ledger. They think I know where it is. He clenched his jaw. Do you? She looked up slowly, her silence the only answer he needed. 2 nights later, they hid in a safe house deep in Catania. Rain lashed against the windows. Cassian sat shirtless at the table, cleaning his weapon. Scars ran across his back, brutal, old, carved by a father who believed pain was the only teacher. Seraphina watched him from across the room. You hate him, she said softly. But part of you still lives by his rules. Cassian didn't look up. I hate what he made me. But without him, I wouldn't know how to survive this. She stepped closer, her voice trembling. And without you, I'd be dead already. For a moment, silence again. Intimate, dangerous. Her hand brushed his. He froze, eyes lifting to hers, and then the world disappeared. Their lips met, not out of lust, but the quiet ache of 2 souls who knew they were doomed. Every touch was confession, every breath a promise neither could keep. When she pulled away, tears glistened on her face. "This is madness," she whispered. "So is living without you," he replied. Morning came with a scream. Seraphina woke to find Cassian gone. On the table lay a letter, written in his sharp hand. "I'll end this before it ends us. Don't follow me." She tore it in half, rage and fear burning through her veins. He had gone to Palermo, back to the heart of the underworld, to finish what his father started. She found him 2 nights later, standing inside a cathedral-turned-armory. The Black Cross had surrounded him. Their leader, a man named Father Marius, stepped forward, rosary glinting around his wrist. "Cassian Dravaro," he said, "your father's sins bleed through you. Give us the ledger, and you might die clean." Cassian's voice was ice. "My father may have been the devil, but even devils don't kneel." Gunfire thundered. The war began again. Seraphina ran through the chaos, heart pounding. She found Cassian bleeding near the altar, one hand clutching his side. He looked at her, a ghost of a smile on his lips. "You shouldn't have come. You shouldn't have left," she cried, pressing her hands to his wound. He laughed softly, eyes dimming. "You were right. The truth would destroy me." She leaned close, whispering through her tears. "Then let me carry it for you." And then she told him the truth his father had hidden. The ledger wasn't a book. It was her memories.
Her blood.
Her DNA encoded with the biometric key to his father's digital empire. She was the living record, the devil's secret weapon, built from science and sin. "He used me," she sobbed. "He made me a vessel for everything he couldn't trust on paper. And now, they'll never stop hunting me." Cassian's gaze softened with something deeper than pain. Understanding. His father had created the perfect trap. Cassian could save her, or save himself. Never both. That night, as sirens wailed across Palermo, Cassian made his choice. He took Seraphina's face in his hands, his blood staining her cheeks. "You were never his sin," he whispered. "You were his redemption. And now you'll be mine." Before she could answer, he turned, raised his gun, and fired into the gas lines. The cathedral erupted into flame. The blast swallowed the night, the city, and every secret the devil had left behind. When dawn came, only ruins remained. The Vatican declared Cassian Dravaro dead, the ledger lost forever. But miles away, on a train bound for Florence, a woman sat alone, wearing his ring on a chain around her neck. And her eyes burned both grief and promise. The world thought the devil's heir was gone, but love had left its heir behind, Florence. 6 months later, the city was alive with color, but for Seraphina Vale, the world had faded to shades of gray. She lived under a false name, Elena Fiora, and worked in a small antique bookstore on Via Roma. To strangers, she was just another quiet woman with a past she never spoke of. But inside her chest burned the ghost of a man she could never forget, Cassian Dravaro, the heir to the devil's throne. The man who had set himself on fire to save her. Every night she dreamed of the explosion, the flames consuming the cathedral, his voice whispering, "You'll be my redemption." And every morning, she woke with tears on her lips. She thought she'd escaped, until one winter evening, the bell above the bookstore door rang. She looked up and froze. A man in a dark coat stood at the door, his face hidden beneath the shadow of a hat. But when he lifted his head, her world stopped. It was him, alive. Barely. Cassian Dravaro. His face was marked by scars, his eyes hollow with pain and years. But his presence, that quiet, commanding gravity, hadn't changed. Seraphina dropped the book in her hand. "Cassian," he stepped closer, his voice rough. "I told you not to follow me." Tears blurred her vision. "And I told you I'd never leave you." He reached out, touched her face, his hands trembling as if the touch itself was a miracle. "I had to let them believe I died," he whispered. "The ledger, they never stop hunting it. Hunting you." Her lips trembled. "Then why come back?" Cassian's jaw clenched. "Because I can't hide anymore. The war my father began, it's not over. And now I have to finish it the right way." That night, they sat together in the dim light of her apartment. two broken pieces trying to fit again. Cassian told her what had happened, how he'd survived the blast, how he'd seen his father's enemies destroy each other in the aftermath, but something new had risen from the ashes. A syndicate led by the remnants of La Crocinera, calling themselves the Purity. They believed the ledger still existed, hidden inside Seraphina's blood. They want to erase everything, he said. My father's sins. His enemies. You. Seraphina looked at him, voice trembling. What are you going to do? He exhaled slowly. End it. For good this time. Days turned into weeks. They moved from city to city, running, hiding, planning. Cassian had changed, quieter, gentler, as if every word he spoke was borrowed from time he didn't think he deserved. Seraphina, too, was no longer afraid. For the first time, they weren't running from the past. They were walking through it together. Night, she would trace the scars on his chest, the burns, the bullet lines, each one a memory of how far love can reach before it breaks. And sometimes, he would smile. A rare, fragile thing. If there's a heaven, he'd say, it's moments like this. Then don't die again, she'd whisper. He never promised. He only held her closer. But fate, as always, was listening that on a cold March night, as they prepared to leave Florence, Cassian received a message to photograph Seraphina, asleep beside the window, taken from outside. They'd found them again. He didn't tell her. He simply kissed her forehead that night and whispered, if I'm not here when you wake up, run north. There'll be a man waiting at the border with papers. Trust him. Cassian, promise me. She did, because love sometimes means letting go, even when your hands are bleeding. At dawn, he was gone. Seraphina woke to silence and an empty bed. Outside, the sky was dark with clouds. Hours later, across the Italian countryside, explosions shattered the morning. News broke that an old estate belonging to the Purity had been destroyed, everyone inside dead, and among the ruins, authorities found a single sign, a serpent carved into the concrete, wrapped around a crown, the mark of the Dravaro bloodline. 2 weeks later, Seraphina stood at the cliffs of Palermo, the sea roaring beneath her, eye and her hand. She held Cassian's ring, the same one he'd worn the night they met. She pressed it to her lips. You burned the world to keep me safe, she whispered. But you never understood. You were the only home I ever had. She tossed the ring into the sea. The waves swallowed it whole, and in that endless horizon, she felt him, not gone, but everywhere. Some say the devil's heir died twice. Others say he still walks the shadowed streets of Sicily, a ghost guarding the woman who carries his legacy. But Seraphina never looked back. She lived quietly, carrying both his sin and his love in her heart. Proof that even devils can be redeemed, and even the damned can teach heaven what love means.